Hello and welcome back. So, a while back, we have been discussing a lot of the Chris and articles. Basically, these things get updated every year or so, and believe you me, there is so much that probably even 12 months later, we still haven't exactly got the full story. But to be honest, I feel like, as I've mentioned before, the reason why we're only doing this again is because I want to make more ambitious videos. I want to branch out, but I also wanted to be reminded because with the recent released footage of Chris Chan's arrest all the way back in 2021, it's still almost beyond my notice, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of just how much we have yet to talk about, because forget the documentary series for 1 second. Forget the videos I put out. Forget the videos other people put out. There's still plenty of other people out there. And we all need to have that. This is almost like almost like therapy in many sense, because sometimes when you think that you're going nowhere in life and you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, remember Chris Chan exists, and that, well, to be honest, I think I'll have to do an entire video about a retrospective about my opinions about Chris, because they have changed in the 5 years I've been talking about him. Well, coming up to 6, but that's a video for another day. So here is, well, Chris and DRUGS. I'm saying that for the algorithm because I know that, the people involved in YouTube can't spell. So here we go. The despicable mention of rude words and drugs in Song of Christian. A drug is any substance other than food that changes an organism's physiology or psychology when consumed. Much like shoving things up his ass, recreational drugs was something that Chris used to preach against. And how? Until he eventually tried alcohol and discovered he loved the somewhat pleasant effects. As of 2021, Chris has consumed caffeine, cannabis, and alcohol. He has yet to smoke a cigarette or try any hard drugs such as cocaine. Chris has also been on a litany of prescription and over-the-counter drugs to treat his various ailments. Prescription drugs. Prescriptions for mental health. Due to Chris's autism, he had to take a variety of prescription drugs over the years. As of 2000, Chris has been taking the antidepressant Paxil for his autism, which increased from 20 milligrams to 30 milligrams after his psychiatric diagnosis. But sometime before December 2009, he stopped taking it, and instead began taking paroxetine, citing Paxil's side effects. Interestingly enough, both have the same chemical composition, meaning both are the same drug with different trade names. If word ever gets out that Chris felt paroxetine didn't have the same side effects as Paxil, know that this is just an example of the placebo effect. It is possible that Paxil/paroxetine's side effects included making orgasm harder and increased potential for weight gain. Sometime afterwards, Bob found out about its side effects and switched to fluoxetine. It is likely she switched relatively recently, as she still mentioned paroxetine well into October of 2017. In the same paper, it also mentioned his taking of imperamine for unknown reasons. I don't really know what imperamine is, and I've never had to take any prescription drugs for my Asperger's, but it's one of those things that has. In fact, to be honest, well, getting into discussions about why Chris needs to be on Paxil at all is something I'll have to work out, considering that my knowledge of things like paroxetine and Paxil and fluoxetine is very none and void. So let's move on to the actual drugs that Chris takes. For the majority of his life, Chris has had cholesterol problems. To combat this, instead of eating like a normal human being and getting exercise, he eats poorly and rarely exercises while taking Lipitor, a cholesterol-lowering drug. While Lipitor and similar drugs can have a positive effect in lowering the cholesterol levels of those taking it, If one doesn't change their lifestyle as well, there will be little change in the cholesterol level. I generally did not know. Now, do you want to say Chris never knew about that, or never took that into consideration? But then again, it must have occurred at some point to Chris that you got to change your lifestyle in some way or form, because I know fine well that literally it's like having protein shakes every day. It's not going to, you're not going to be filled with energy. Because among many other things, you know what things that protein shakes do to your body? They turn your blood into your blood becomes incredibly acidic, and it starts to disintegrate your bones because you're in dying need of calcium, which makes you liable to having brittle bones, and literally you're more prone to having accidents in which you can suffer through a variety of broken bones. Just those sorts of things you need to watch out for. But then again, I mean, I couldn't imagine in any scenario that Chris's bones would have been so brittle that even his immense weight would have caused his body to collapse on itself. I mean, I don't think that's ever happened before, but there is always a first time, and, well, maybe if Chris believed Magi-chan told him to do it, I'm not entirely sure, but at some point. Well, probably not at some point either. I don't think anyone... No, no way. Chris, having taken Lipitor since at least August 2009, has had some improvement with his cholesterol levels, getting a score of 140 milligrams. While not low, is not high either, since Chris is very unfit. It's likely that Lipitor seems to be doing a decent job, but Chris knows fine well he could be doing better. Then again, the question follows about whether or not Chris cares enough to do better is, it's neither here nor there. It's worth noting that, as Casey and her dad pointed out, he started taking the drug in his 20s, when it and other statins are really meant for people above the age of 40 and are only recommended for younger patients when the risk of early cardiovascular diseases is that high. Chris also takes a drug to combat blood pressure, likely a blood thinner concerning his fat-high diet. It is known that Chris also takes antibiotics for UTIs, aka urinary tract infections, which is probably more down to the squalor that Chris used to live at when he was at 14 Branch Lane Court, but this seemed to be only an issue in the early 2010s, and it didn't really come up at any other point afterwards. At least, Chris didn't feel the urge to tell the world this. HRT. Ever since May of 2015, Chris has been taking various forms of hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, to successfully transition. Unfortunately, as this picture will prove, Chris is not particularly very clever at doing it, nor is Chris particularly very clever in going to the very necessary extent of trying to know exactly what you should be doing. So, here we are. Now, it's funny enough that during the last 12 months, I became friends with somebody who is transgender, and even though, obviously, the details are quite, graphic, and we've never openly discussed them and stuff like that, it's worth noting, I think, that people who know fine well what they had to do will absolutely have a field day in terms of explaining. So, if there are any out there, and hopefully she knows who she's talking about, there's plenty of room for discussion here. So, there it is. Meanwhile, estrogel. Normally, transgender people plan out their gender transitions with doctors to ensure safety throughout the process, especially if they are taking hormones. Unfortunately, Chris did the opposite. No surprise there. In 2015, he acquired estrogel, a hormone replacement therapy cream meant for post-menopausal women. Did Chris... serious question, did Chris at any point, ask anybody about this? Did Chris bother going to seek advice? I mean, we know that Chris at one point went and saw a doctor to say, yes, you are transgender, but did he did Chris not take any advice whatsoever from the professional about what to do? Also, estrogel is meant to be prescription only, but Chris got around the requirement to see a doctor by ordering it through offshore pharmacy. Estrogel has health risks, such as fluid retention, weight changes, rise in blood pressure, potentially disastrous for an obese person like Chris, and blood clots. And that is when it is applied properly via a small dosage on the arm once per day. He even managed to fail at following the directions on the package, as shown in Estrogel Application and Vibrating Bra How To, in which he slavers the cream onto his stomach like buttering bread. And as I said before, doesn't Chris look incredibly intelligent and clever, knowing the fact that his hair is basically shriveled seaweed because Chris couldn't be bothered to read the instructions to get his hair dyed to blue, and that, well, pictures could speak 1,000 words, eh? That's, if ever I've heard one. Kim Wilson revealed that he was taking the hormones in May of 2015, and Chris mentioned the drug again as late as August 2016. Throughout 2015 to 2016, he repeatedly complained via Facebook posts of feeling dizzy and ill, but failed to connect the dots and think that it could be caused taking over dosages of a black market drug without a physician's approval. Proper HRT. At some point in the fall of 2016, he finally went to a medical professional and was prescribed proper HRT. In his interview with Copper Cab, Chris mentions he takes the testosterone blocker, spirolactone, which he nicknames Spyro the Dragon, which I'm going to call it Spyro as well because that's way easier to say, and estradiol to assist in transitioning. Chris revealed in his March 2024 livestream that he has been taking estradiol and Spyro for years. Well, goodness knows about how long it possibly took for Chris to do this, but, well, considering that it's one of those few occasions where Chris is being completely and utterly truthful for however much he was being paid to ask that. Alcohol. Background. Like many things in his life, Chris has drastically changed his feelings about intoxicating beverages over the years. Chris once described alcohol as a slow-acting poison in his Future Message video. He also touched on the subject during Viviteg's AIM chat, where in line 309, he mentioned that he would not go to a singles bar because of it and cigarettes. Fortunately, well, if Chris decided to ever come to the UK, they've banned outdoor smoking, so I imagine Chris could, get around that at some point. I mean, it's right there for the picking as far as Chris is concerned. So then again, I'm not entirely sure if Chris could even leave the state of Virginia, let alone travel to the UK. Not now. Alcohol. Background. Like many things in his life, Chris has drastically changed his feelings about intoxicating beverages over the years. Chris once described alcohol as a slow-acting poison in his Future Message video. He also touched on the subject during Vivteg's AIM chat, where in line 309, he mentioned that he would not go to a singles bar because of it, and cigarettes. When asked about alcohol in Mumble Chat 2, he stated that it causes liver dysfunction and likely bar fights and automobile accidents. Considering Chris has had some automobile accidents whilst completely sober, we could only put this down to the fact that Chris can't really drive well, I suppose, which begs the question how he even has a license, but we might never know. Chris delivered a particularly effusive tirade in one of his emails to Regé Fils Amis. Also, I bet you probably smoke and drink, don't you? I speak against those as well, as since they are tools to speed you to death with cancer, liver problems, bar fights, and automobile accidents. Give up the habits. They are bad, beyond gross, and disgusting.
And of course, this is Chris going back on his word with what looks like a caterpillar crawling down his neck. Yeah, that Chris, this was early in 2009. This was in the middle of 2009. So that didn't stick around, that did it. Discovery and use. Despite his initial feelings about alcohol, a hypocritical video of Chris drinking a Long Island iced tea was uploaded to YouTube on the 12th of June 2009, showing us signs that perhaps Chris is willing to throw all his principles out the window when the chance to impress a female arises. Well, it probably didn't work, because during this excursion, Chris touched somebody multiple times after they said no, and Chris could have ruined what little chance he had at least gaining a potential sweetheart. Mind you, if I was a woman and I was called a potential sweetheart, or was going out with somebody who uses the phrase boyfriend-free girl, we wouldn't even get through the door. I would have ran to the other end of the street. I would have crossed the road without bothering to look. That's how much I would have gone away. The type of cocktail isn't recommended for novice drinkers, due to having a rather strong amount of alcoholic ingredients like vodka, triple sec, rum, tequila, and gin. It's possible that Chris chose it because he amused, due to its name, that it was literally just iced tea. Alcohol was mentioned briefly in the video shortly after, titled, "I'm sorry dude." In this video, Chris makes an offer to treat Logan to drinks as opposed to his past offers of coffee or soda to those whom he wanted to get to know. Alcohol was briefly revisited again on camera in Chris's Big Night Out 2, where Chris was seen drinking. Chris's first recorded video where he appeared visibly intoxicated was "Bless the fans, curse the trolls." Alcohol began a slow and steady progression into Chris's life. This was made obvious in an email to Regina, where he said, "I've always tasted Mike's Hard Lemonade, Budweiser, Miller McCobb, Samuel Adams, and a couple of others. And I look forward to sampling more varieties of liquor." Budweiser is apparently his brand of choice, based on eyewitness reports from Fridays After 5 and his account of a trip to a bar prior to visiting the game place on the 6th of June 2010. Meanwhile, a video from mid-October 2010 showed Chris slugging a Kahula straight from the bottle, although he didn't seem to enjoy it too much. When a correspondent in Mailbag 6 challenged him regarding his shift in attitude, Chris replied, "I discourage underage drinking fully. I wanted to try it once for myself." In Mailbag 16 from December 2009, he described his drinking habits in more detail. "I am more of a social drinker. I generally do not spend a weekly amount on drinks. I only drink at like a party or with a friend on rare occasions." This remark was met with some skepticism from trolls, since Chris has no friends. Bit harsh, but yes. Much less who would want to invite him to parties. Take him to the party, he's a nerd. Even after discarding his original hardline attitude though, Chris still found opportunities to get a little preachy regarding the demon liquor. In Mailbag 33 from early January 2010, he remarked, "And alcohol in responsible, moderate amounts. It can be good for you. Yet I do not support too much of it. As if left unchecked, unresponsible or unassisted, too much can lead to fights that can lead to a trip to the hospital and automobile accidents." He also, in Mailbag 5, advanced the bizarre theory that drinking while pregnant can provoke homosexuality in the child. Goodness knows where Chris got that from, but likely troll influence that Chris believed above, actual professionals. AKA anybody who absolutely would have just sat bolt upright and say, "No, it's not true." In the 6th of June 2010, Chris revealed that he had been drinking at a bar before driving to the game place and getting into a confrontation with a manager. Let me guess, the manager asked, "Sir, why were you driving here whilst having a drink?" Good question. Because you could have obviously have smelt it on Chris's breath. It's not exactly as if Chris, brushes his teeth. Although, to be honest, that might have been enough to mask whatever it was he was drinking. Alcohol may be contributing to Chris's declining health. Since his decision to leave the internet and instead seek real-life interaction, Chris has revealed to us that he spent most of his day sitting in bars and playing on his Nintendo DSi. While he once claimed to be a social drinker, it is becoming quite obvious that he is anything but. Chris's childlike perception of the world is most likely deafening his awareness to his substance advancement of relevancy in his life. At this point, he may be turning to alcohol for escapism. Also, alcoholism has been proven to be a telltale sign of Peter Pan syndrome, which clearly applies to Chris. In addition, Chris, being the slow in the mind that he is alleged to add raw sugar to his beer on a regular basis. So, well, it's either Chris will croak or his teeth will drop out before he hits the floor. It's one of the two. Not only is this unnecessary, but may lead to further problems in the near future. It is obvious that with Chris's current loneliness and depression, his alcohol use may yield repercussions in his life. And it did. In July 2016, while Chris thought to have been drunk and depressed over lack of progress on his gender transition, well, did this to stimulate the opening of a vagina. Alcohol made another appearance in the Cwcville chant performance, in which Chris states he had 5 swigs of vodka. Fantastic. Good for letting us know that. The TT squad, aged 18 to 19, tried to get Chris to buy them Reeb in 2018. It's not said here whether or not Chris actually did, but yikes. In 2021, enabler Kawaii Sandbag revealed that Chris had told him in messages that he would drink heavily once every few weeks. Even with known accounts of Chris's past alcohol use, this news was surprising and very concerning. The holy labels which Chris has been sending to fans from jail are expressly intended to be used for drinking non-alcoholic beverages. This is a strange inversion of the Christian rite of Holy Communion, which most Christian denominations celebrate using wine, although some Protestant denominations use non-alcoholic grape juice. Chandler family and alcohol. It is interesting to note that Cole Smithy mentions that Bob and Barbara Chandler met at a bar and acted like a couple of drunken losers. The Chandlers' pre-fire family room had memorabilia from various brewing companies, including Ballantine and Bass, indicating that Chris's parents never shared his antipathy to alcohol even in their old age. Chris's family line has had a history with alcohol. Chris's maternal great-grandfather, Robert Pettis Wynn, drank heavily and had a girlfriend during the time he was married. Family stories say he failed to provide even the most basic support for his wife and children. There are also others who say he was a moonshiner. In the comics. In Sonichu, Chris refers to beer in all instances as Reeb, which is just beer spelled backwards. He probably thought this clever emojilap very clever. At first glance, this seems odd, until you realize Chris was under the impression that Sonichu was targeted towards children despite the graphic sex scene in issue 8, and frequent depictions of violent death. And so, he feels he must censor any mention of alcohol in the comic. This is a common theme in English-translated anime shows such as Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon, particularly those aimed at a younger audience. Possessing or drinking alcohol was also one of the worst crimes to commit in Cwcville, and could have led to a $1,500 fine or 10 years in prison. The fact that Chris thinks that 10 years in prison and a $1,500 fine are interchangeable is indicative of his broader attitude towards money. It is also interesting to note that this punishment is much more lenient than the Cwcville penalty for homosexuality. And you thought Chris was intolerant. He always was, but moving on. Chris later said in his Rolling and Trolling video, even when Chris was transitioning and declared himself as a bisexual, lesbian, trans woman, Chris was still incredibly intolerant. In his Rolling and Trolling video, that the prohibition had since been repealed. Reeb
is the drink of choice for the drunkards working at 4centgarbage.com. It should also be noted that there really is a drink called Reeb. It's a Chinese beer produced in Shanghai, though it's doubtful that Chris never knew about it. Tobacco. No smoking and want woman, 2 of Chris's war cries. Oh god, and I know what you're thinking again. There's children in the background of all this, and he was at an event that was primarily aimed at kids, and he dresses like this. The fact that Chris is not a child molester once lost me 50 quid. I'm never going to see that 50 quid ever again. And smoking will eventually cause cancer, and you'll be most likely to get heart attack, viruses, and your life will be cut drastically short. They don't call them death cigarettes and cigars death sticks for nothing. Other than killing you slowly, if I could, I would take every last ounce of tobacco, put them on a rocket, and shoot them up to the moon. Probably Snoop Dogg will be following that, but that's besides the point. Tobacco, called tobacco by Chris, is a recreational drug derived from nicotina plants. If Chris could, he would send every last ounce of tobacco on a rocket to the moon. One of the prerequisites for a sweetheart that Chris has never veered from is that she must be smoke-free. Given his flip-flopping regarding his hatred of alcohol, it is uncertain whether Chris has ever smoked, although he did pretend to smoke a peace pipe for Jackie. Chris on tobacco. In his famous future message video of the 24th of February 2007, Chris expressed his wish for all tobacco to be shot to the moon. In an ED edit from the 10th of November 2007, regarding a comment about Christian Western Chandler's future message, Chris said he was uncomfortable saying the word tobacco. Chris's tobacco rocket plan was elaborated on in January of 2009. I have given thought of sending the tobacco to the sun, but then the smell from all that would likely emit from the giant star and stink up our galaxy, possibly shortening the lifespan not only around the world, but the other 8 planets as well. Okay, so who's going to be the first to tell Chris, there is no life on any other planets? It's a good thing Chris averted from sending it. He would have committed genocide across 8 planets, so good for you, Chris, for changing your mind. Chris has also related a dream he once had regarding the risks posed by tobacco consumption. I was in a factory, and I watched people lying on a conveyor belt with their mouth full of cigarettes, going through burning ovens, coming out singed, not on fire, then dunked into a huge tank of alcohol that dissolved them to dust like acid would do. Well, why not just say acid then? And their remains would come out of the factory's smokestacks in puffs of smoke and ashes. And another detail, the front of the factory is skull-shaped. This is apparently Chris's cigarette nightmare, which basically is Dr. Wily's castle for Mega Man. Whatever he was meaning by this. Chris has stated that tobacco and alcohol importation is the most severe crime in Cwcville and warrants 10 years imprisonment or a $1,500 fine. In short, importing cigarettes is worse than rape, theft, murder, or even being a homosexual in Cwcville. Ironically, one of Chris's own ancestors was a tobacco farmer, according to his death certificate. Go figure. Was this the one who was allegedly meant to be of Cwrocian descent? Considering that there never was, it's just curious to hear all this out. Cannabis. Chris seemed to have an even stronger hatred for cannabis, marijuana, pot, weed, etc. Triple sud, a crack candle. I could go on. Despite it being hailed as a possible autism treatment, no, I think you're gonna need something. You're gonna need something a lot more than just medically disagreeable than cannabis to cure whatever the hell is going on in Chris's head. Sad but true. This is evidenced by the fact that in Cwcville, cigarette smokers are only given a $1,500 fine, but those who simply possess weed are taken to a maximum security prison, the same place Cwcville detains terrorist leaders, as well as the fate of Kathleen in the Book 10 replacement comic. Interestingly, the Jamaican war veteran Enos from the original Sonic 2 issue 10 somehow managed to escape this sentence.
Instead of being forced into a soup hotel by Ultra Sonichu, dialogue indicates it was because Sonichu believed he was actually smoking tobacco, despite him being high as a kite, unintentionally revealing that Chris may believe tobacco and cannabis to be interchangeable. The fact that wacky tobacco was used as a name for cannabis back in the 1940s and 50s, and even probably during the production of Reefer Madness, further adds weight to this theory. In true Chris hypocritical fashion, it was revealed by Kim on Facebook that in July of 2016, Chris had tried smoking cannabis at OmegaCon, and he was offered it at Impulse as well. Chris confirmed that he did try weed a couple of times in a Twitter comment. Thanks, not totally my thing, that kind of high, the couple of times aside. The fact that somebody was actually willing to offer it and that Chris was not actually buying it from a dealer is strange. Though I only suspect they only did it because they know that Chris was probably going to do something stupid. Or not. Does smoking cannabis mean you get to see, Sonichu and, Magi-chan as well? Maybe Chris should have been on that and he would have believed that the dimensional merge had been going on his entire life. Under the influence of the idea guy, Chris changed Sonichu's official birthday to the 20th of April, or 420, often celebrated as a stoner holiday. However, given the idea guy's apparent obsession with Nazis and other offensive topics, this could also be a reference to the birthday of Adolf Hitler, or the date of the 1999 Columbine High School massacre. In 2018, Chris smoked pot with the TT squad hanging out at their house to partake. Virginia legalized weed at a state level in July of 2021, making it the first southern state to do so. However, Chris spent the month hooked up on a different vice, which is still very much illegal. Way to go, Chris. Think about that. The day before Chris got arrested, he could have just smoked one up and he would have been okay. Well, not okay, but, well, just before, they throw away the key. Caffeine. Being an avid Coca-Cola drinker, Chris is no stranger to caffeine consumption, although he curiously denied using caffeine in the autism papers. His heavy soda consumption is likely to blame for his distorted sleep patterns. Notably, the 2014 house fire started after Chris tried to brew coffee in the bathroom early in the morning, causing a frayed extension cord to spark and set the house on fire. Which, ironically, you usually hear these sort of stories happen when somebody just lights up a cigarette and then falls asleep. Which is curious beyond words, but then again, it just sort of happened that way. Yeah. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That was the Chris and Drugs article section for the year of 2025. The more I think about it, and it will become sort of apparent as we go through the body section for Chris, is that Chris only really gives in to the fact that he might not be completely correct about his presumptions because they were likely influenced by his parents. That, you know what, how does Chris not know he won't like something unless he actually tries it? I mean, his parents should have been a bit more harder on him when he said, drinking Coke all day is bad, and that Coke isn't particularly, you shouldn't really be having it. But it didn't, this idea literally did not translate any further forward than, well, just try not to have it regularly and stuff like that. Considering, but then again, it probably might be down to, dieting and stuff like diet Pepsi and stuff like that. I don't know if that stops or reduces the risk of diabetes, but considering Chris is not a diabetic, considering his diet and considering how old he is now, it's a miracle that Chris has never had any major issues regarding what he's taken before, because you would have thought with somebody with this lifestyle and this many problems that this was going to be disastrous, but not any less disastrous than anything else that's happened in Chris's life, but that's besides the point. And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys enjoyed the Chris and Drugs section of the Quickie, and I cannot wait to sort of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.